We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and I played with a ween. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my curious co-host, Andrew Williams. How you doing today, Andrew?
I'm all right, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing pretty good. We are here in Houston preparing for a hurricane at the time of this recording, so the rain is here. Not quite the storm yet. We are, where I live in Houston, where I'm told we're getting the dirty side of this thing. It's gonna be some nasty rain and weather. So,
as opposed to the clean side.
well, you know, the west side of the hurricane is because it picks up all the crap in the wind and throws it over to you on the west side. So it just gets nasty. But yeah, it's typical Houston stuff. This is the first hurricane of the season. Won't be the last.
Was this Beryl?
Beryl. Hopefully we don't lose power in this record, or you might hear some thunder. It is what it is, Andrew. I would say we postpone the recording, but who knows what the future holds in this thing.
You may never hear from us again.
Well, how about you, Andrew? The people want to know, I'm sure, at the time of this recording, it's still Criterion Month at Barnes & Noble. Do you have any new pickups since last time we were on the mic?
Well, anybody hanging out in our Discord has probably seen so the first pickups I got were Bound, Peeping Tom, and Blue Velvet. I think I talked about those already. But I did snag, I don't remember if I talked about this or not, To Die For, Mildred Pierce, and Black Narcissus.
I don't think so. I don't think we said that on mic. But
anyway, so those three. I grabbed those last weekend. Mildred Pierce and To Die For were kind of blind buys for the most part. I've heard of Mildred Pierce obviously a lot. It's kind of a mystery noir-esque film. And To Die For is just a weird kind of comedy black drama thing with I said those words in the wrong order, folks. I'm sorry.
Very different meaning when he changed the
black
order.
Comedy film. It's like a Jesus Christ. But it's like a satirical black comedy film with Nicole Kidman, directed by Gus Van Sant from '95.
So it's the one with like her face on the cover, that creepy smile, right?
Yeah.
I had that one. I might pick that one up too.
It's Gus Van Sant directed it based off the novel. Gus Van Sant's just such a. I guess the thing that I say about Gus Van Sant is, you know, I don't really enjoy everything that he does, but I guess I'm glad he's out there doing it. Like the Psycho thing is so weird, but like I almost have to respect him for doing it, because like that's like a drunk bar idea to be like, dude, what if I remade Psycho shot for shot? And then the fact that he got a studio to pay for him to do that, I'm just kind of like, I kind of have to be like, good for you, dude. Like, I don't know how you pulled it off, but good job.
I feel very similarly about Richard Linklater.
Yeah.
And granted, they both have similar styles at times, where it's just like, people are hanging out. There happens to be a camera nearby, catching everyday conversation. But all in all, I think I like more Linklater movies than Gus Van Sant. But again, like you just said about Gus Van Sant, I don't like every Richard Linklater swing, but I appreciate every single one of them. And it's just so weird that Gus Van Sant can do like Good Will Hunting, which is like a pretty straightforward drama Oscar-y thing, but then do like Elephant and Last Days, where it's just like the most film school indie movie you've ever seen.
Right.
I agree on all points. Well, good, Andrew. I'm guessing...
also.
More.
Oh no. Well, I did do a rather large order from the Kino Lorber sale that I really couldn't resist on, and that was a sizable. So I already did. I think I talked about it before. The first, when Barnes & Noble had a Kino Lorber sale,
right?
And I got that stack of things. I got yet another stack of like 13 or 14 movies.
Yeah, you went ham on that sale.
I did. Well, and everything was so cheap, man. Like the 4Ks were like $18. The Blu-rays were like $10. I was like, my God, man. I was like, what was I supposed to do? You guys know how weak I am, but
I think I've hit up all the same sales as you, but I don't think I've gone as hard on any of them.
And now I'm staring down this Arrow sale, man. Like, why are they all at the same time? Why did they do this?
It hurts. It hurts the wallet, but feels good when they arrive. Criterion, I think I talked about Bound and The Graduate. I got those. I grabbed Lone Star. I can't remember if I talked about that, but my most recent pickup, I got to hit up every Barnes & Noble I happen to come across town, see what calls to me. I grabbed Blood Simple because they have that in 4K.
Yep. I need to upgrade that one. I have to check.
The Coen brothers, I would say I feel pretty similarly about as the other two directors we're talking about, where I don't like every movie that they do, but I at the very least appreciate all of them. Some of the swings are a little weirder than others, but Blood Simple's where it started, and I have yet to see it. So,
it's
a good way to check it out.
A plus.
What's your favorite Coen brothers? Do you have an easy answer to that?
I mean, Big Lebowski's the one that I go back to the most often. So, like, it's the age-old questions. You didn't ask me what the best movie made was. You asked me what my favorite movie was.
Sure.
It's so I mean, Big Lebowski is it's definitely the one that I've revisited the most. Fargo is so good. I don't think people talk about William H. Macy. We did Mystery Men. Speaking of Kino Lorber's sale, Mystery Men's 4K there. William H. Macy is so spineless and cowardly in Fargo that like nobody talks about just how great a performance that is. But like he's so sniveling, he's so cowardly, he's so unlikable. He's just the worst in that movie. Obviously not the worst person in the movie. It's a movie full of a lot of bad people, but like he's just like terrible in that movie. And I'm just like every time I watch it, I just like forget because like William H. Macy is easy to just kind of point at and be like, oh yeah, he's that guy. Like that guy you've seen from the things. But like that man shows up and does the work. I
feel like he's made a career out of being pathetic because I feel like Shameless has a lot of shades of that.
Yeah.
And Magnolia is a very sad character there. It's actually Mystery Man's kind of the outlier because he's like the most heroic on that team. But
he's basically Superman, but he's especially compared to what he normally does. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about Fargo. Fargo is just great too. I just saw I know they've done some of their own stuff. Like they've kind of split and they're doing their own thing now. And like I saw Drive Away Dolls, which I think was Joel did that one. I don't remember, but that was fine. It's all fine. There's certain stuff where I'm just kind of like, all right, so in a similar vein of like, it's not all working, but I think I said it about M. Night was the guy I said it about the first time. Just like, I don't dig it all, but I'm glad he's out there. The Coen brothers are legendary directors at this point, I would say.
Sure.
Like they've got their career speaks for itself. So, I mean,
so much so that Bill Murray made Garfield. That's how powerful they're.
Because he thought they wrote it.
I say, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is my favorite Coen brothers. It's like the first one I really got into. I just love the quirky tone to that movie, and I think it's absolutely hilarious, but like fun at the same time. And I would probably say No Country for Old Men is like the best, like quality.
I mean,
it's so good.
I remember when that came out, and people were just like, "Oh man!" Like that was like, like a lot of their movies are got this weird kind of. There's this like dark, like the Big Lebowski is a comedy. Like it's a funny movie. Like Fargo, I wouldn't necessarily say is a comedy by nature, but it's got this undercurrent of comedy through it. I remember the first time I saw No Country for Old Men, I was like, oh, they've got this in them. Like this is where they can go with it. I was just like, this is a little scary. But I mean, I feel like if gun to head, what's the best Coen Brothers movie? It's probably No Country for Old Men, but Big Lebowski is easily the one I've watched the most, just because. Again, for a movie like The Big Lebowski is a movie that could be a lot dumber than it is, and it ends up being really smart for what it ends up being. So, and I guess that's just kind of what they were doing for a while.
Andrew, we could talk about the Coens all day. We could talk about Criterions and all these quality, prestige, great films, but you know that's not what our podcast is about, Andrew. Each week, we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's SNL month, and this week we are talking the 1994 film, It's Pat. Andrew, it's here. Literally the movie I was most scared to cover during this month. We were putting this month together. I think I even I asked you, I was like, are you sure we want to do this? Like, should we maybe skip this one? And I think your exact words were like, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. Like, let's do it right. Let's just dive into it.
No, I'm pretty sure I told us not to do it.
I think I tried to get out of it, and you said you're the one that stuck with it. But at any case,
the other option was Stuart Saves His Family. So I think we were looking at an interesting challenge no matter what. So
I guess we didn't do Superstar for some reason. We could put Superstar in here.
I feel like Superstar was generally successful though. Like
no way.
Let's find out. We're here now. I mean, it's not got a good Rotten Tomatoes score, but it made $30 million off a $14 million budget, so it made some money.
Okay. Anyway, Andrew, what is your history with this one though? It's Pat.
None.
History with this movie? Have you ever seen it before?
No.
Do you have any? Did you ever see any sketches back in the day? Like, no, nothing. Okay, but you're
absolutely nothing. I mean, I take that back. I'm sure I saw like the character on something before, but like whether it was the SNL sketches or something. But like, I have had no attachment to the Pat character from SNL. Like, it's not something that like entered my life. I think it was just early enough that like it kind of misses that like. Because I think the Pat sketches, like this movie, I think ends the Pat character for the most part.
I think it started in like 1990.
I think maybe the character appears one more time after this, and then she never does the character again, in part because of what happens with this movie. But like, so like when the 95, 96 into the 2000s era of like the Molly Shannon, Tim Meadows, Chris Kattan, Will Ferrell, like when that era of SNL kind of takes hold, and that's kind of what's in my brain for the most part, this is gone. So like when stuff like, I remember the Roxbury sketches, like when they came out, talking about upcoming shows, like I remember those, but like I don't remember Pat. So it's not something I've ever really had any affinity for. And then this movie's legacy kind of becomes that thing most people associate with Pat at this point.
Oh boy. I saw this movie we're talking about today, probably 1995, 1996.
I thought you were about to say in theaters, and I was like, no way.
No.
No way.
We'll get to box office in a minute. It's actually insane. But no, my brother rented it. Like we go to the video store back in the day, and like, the parents can rent something and the kids can rent something. And my brother, who's 4 years older than me, was like, oh, like he probably saw the sketches. He's like, here's the deal with this character, but this movie's really funny and blah, blah, blah. And I watched this movie. I was very young. There's a few gags that I did remember. And I think we generally enjoyed it back in the day, but I never watched it again. But I was familiar with this character in this movie ever since then. And of course, reflecting on it years later, I'm always thinking like, man, was that really the premise of a film? And especially as, it's 2024 now, we're just all much more socially conscious about certain issues, and it just really seems like an icky thing to go back and visit, which was part of my big hesitation. Part of my big hesitation was like, is it even funny? Part of it was like the actual material. I was really worried about like, how are we gonna have to talk around things? And I'll get into it more a little bit later. I don't think we're gonna have to talk around much stuff. I think this movie is such. Look, we'll get to it, but it wasn't, let's say, as problematic as I feared. I'll say that right now. Andrew, let's set the stage here. This movie is released August 26th of 1994, almost 30 years ago to the day. We're what, a month shy at the 30-year anniversary. I wonder if there'll be a 4K release to commemorate it.
No.
The movie was made on an $8 million budget. Very, very small budget.
Even still, though, man, $8 million for an It's Pat movie.
At the box office, its total box office earnings, $60,000, $60,822. There's an unsighted note on Wikipedia that was pulled after just one weekend for its poor performance. I don't know if that's true, but the numbers certainly back it up. it really looks like it bombed so hard that it was more profitable to pull this film to make more room in the theaters for other movies than it was to try to stick out a theatrical run.
Now, what I want to caveat this number with is that the other thing is that apparently it only opened in 3 cities for a total of 33 theaters.
Right.
Now, that's... I mean,
It's almost like they thought word of mouth would carry it to something, but like, of all the movies to bet on, what an odd strategy.
Well, it almost says to me the opposite. It almost feels like to me like they knew it wasn't going to do well, so they just threw it out there, got something, and then pulled it. Because like $60,000 in 33 theaters is like $1,800 a theater. So like in '94, don't get me wrong, that's a decent number of tickets. I mean, tickets back then were like what, $6-8, if that. So I mean, like you're looking at a decent number of people, but that's an extremely small opening for like a new movie in any time, really. Like,
I mean, I don't know what the strategy was. I feel like you would just go straight to video at that point, like because the video market was booming in the '90s. So I'm sure if this movie did make any money, it was on video. But I don't know. Honestly, I've Googled a lot. My Google search history is probably pretty weird right now. There's just not a lot of info out there. Like Julia Sweeney has done some retrospectives and talked about it, and I'll have a few quotes from her later. But as far as like the theatrical performance and what actually happened there, not a lot of info.
It opened 20th on its opening weekend.
I mean, 3 cities. What are you going to do?
But like literally, Jurassic Park, I think, was in its 64th week and made more money than It's Pat. Jurassic Park had been in theaters for over a year and had still made more money than It's Pat on its opening weekend. I mean, other things here, like Natural Born Killers opened that weekend and was number 1. Forrest Gump was still in theaters. Clear and Present Danger was the Harrison Ford, Jack Ryan movie. The Mask was in theaters. True Lies, The Lion King. Like, there's like genuinely big popular movies that are still in theaters. Like Wagons East opened the same weekend as this movie and made more money. And Wagons East is another notorious kind of bomb of a movie. Gotta wonder if that's going to factor into our show later. But
something Wagons East and It's Pat have in common: 0% on Rotten Tomatoes.
You gotta wonder if we could run with something like that. But
it's amazing we're able to burn one here and still come up with 4 movies for 0% Rotten Tomatoes. But Andrew, it's happening.
Chris, don't look into the future too far. Anyway, just looking at like even movies that I know, like The Client, Little Rascals, In the Army Now. All these movies are in theaters the same time as It's Pat, Blank Man, The Flintstones. The Flintstones is in its 14th week of release and still makes more money than It's Pat.
Crazy what you said about Jurassic Park. Like, it's still like how times have changed. I mean, theatrical runs just
like look at The Fall Guy
anymore.
The Fall Guy is pretty much my go-to recent example of this. The Fall Guy was in The Fall Guy hit digital like 18 days after it went into theaters.
Yeah, you can go see a movie opening weekend and then like pre-order the Steelbook when you get home.
Like, I would be shocked if The Fall Guy still has showtimes. Okay, it does. I'm a liar. But like even then, like there's no way The Fall Guy is going to be in theaters next summer. Like, absolutely no way. And like this may even like literally be dollar theaters for Jurassic Park, but the fact that it was in 547 theaters, no less. So Jurassic Park is doing decent business for movie theaters 64 weeks after being released. That's just crazy to me. But at the same time, like, that might still have been the only way to see it. I don't really know what the timeline was on when it got released on video.
It was probably on video, but the thing is, like, watching a movie at home on VHS on a tube TV just isn't the same, quality. You can watch a movie at home now, which is a big factor in it. Dude, yeah. Andrew, Jurassic, you want to feel old? Old? If Jurassic Park was released
Chris,
today...
I specifically said no.
Andrew, if Jurassic Park were released today, the tagline would be a story 65 million and 31 years in the making.
I hate you so much. I can't stand you. What a prick.
I can't believe I wasted my best joke ever on our It's Bad episode.
I can't believe you did that either. My loathing for you could have increased on a much better episode.
All right, Andrew, let's take a look at the creative team here. The movie's written by Julia Sweeney, who we will talk about more in a moment, as well as Jim Emerson and Stephen Hibbert.
Emerson.
Emerson, did I say it right?
Emerson.
Emerson. Jim Emerson.
Yeah, I don't know. You're running it together in a very strange way.
Jim Emerson.
Jim Emerson, yep.
A person that I had a very hard time learning about. I searched that name. Apparently there's like a film critic under the same name that's kind of prolific. I found a lot of stuff about him, but I did get to Jim Emerson. Emerson?
Emerson.
I'm adding an R in there. I hear it now. Jim Emerson's IMDb.
That's
the only credit is an SNL writer. Yeah, and this movie, it's Pat. So I can only imagine they left the business or passed away, R.I.P. if that's the case. I don't know. Stephen Hibbert, I found a few more things. Was a pretty prolific writer in television, things like Mad TV, Boy Meets World, some cartoons like Tiny Toon Adventures and Animaniacs. So certainly a lot of work in the early 90s. There's some pretty memorable stuff, as well as It's Pat.
Steve Hibbert, I believe, was Julia Sweeney's husband at the time, and had worked with her on some stuff. You can see on his filmography that he's got tons and tons of stuff. Emerson, I believe, is the film critic, by the way. I believe.
You think it's the same person?
I believe it is. And so he's...
I literally bookmarked the film critic conversation because there was this Reddit post about the really weird things they would write on RogerEbert.com. While Roger Ebert was still alive, there's a Donnie Darko and a Fight Club review that are kind of notorious. I think his take on Donnie Darko was that it's about incest, and they said his writings seemed more like a window into his mind than about the movie. But after Roger Ebert passed away, we didn't hear from Jim Emerson ever again. And the whole post was what happened to this guy? No one knew. So if that is the same person, that is pretty amazing.
It's not a lot out there. He was apparently in the Groundlings with Sweeney back in the day, which is kind of where he got kind of pulled into this. And obviously, I guess, had some SNL credits maybe around the same time this was happening. I don't know. But yeah, what an interesting group of people to write this film. Yeah.
The movie is directed by Adam Bernstein. Now, maybe most prolific as a music video director or television director, but impressive credits in both categories. Music videos, just a few of the artists they worked with: Bare Naked Ladies, Beastie Boys, the B-52s. They even directed Baby Got Back, the Sir Mix-a-Lot music video, which is absolutely notorious. What a credit. In the world of TV, where they are still working to this day, TV shows like Orange is the New Black, Breaking Bad, Oz, Californication, Fargo, to kind of bring it back to the Coen brothers. So yeah, just pretty impressive credits beyond this film.
Yeah. Obviously, had done pilots for a bunch of shows, stuff like Strangers with Candy, which is a show that I remember for having also a very, very young Stephen Colbert on it. And yeah, just Scrubs, Entourage, Oz. Yeah, the guy was pretty much doing everything everywhere. Only has a few film credits. It's Pat is the first one. Only does 2 others as of now. One called Six Ways to Sunday, which I've not seen, admittedly, and the other one called Bad Apple, which doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. So, not super prolific in the world of film, but like you said, still out there doing television, and doing that sort of stuff. But this was his foray into feature films.
Well, Andrew, let's just jump into it. Let's talk about this movie. All the positive, Andrew. The things we like about It's Pat. Are you ready?
Yes.
Pat Riley can't seem to hold on to a steady job. And it's this lack of career ambition that drives a wedge between Pat and their partner, Chris. After gaining some notoriety on a television program, Pat believes they can parlay their fame into a career as a musician alongside the band Ween. But unfortunately, they only perform one gig together. Meanwhile, Pat's new neighbor Kyle wonders what gender Pat and Chris are. And that's it, Andrew.
It's a tale as old as time.
That's our story. Boy, let's get into it. What I remembered about this movie is a few gags involving their neighbor desperately trying to find out if Pat's a boy or girl. And that's all I remembered about this character. Like, the joke is Pat's a gender neutral name, and by looking at them, you can't tell if they are male or female. That's a little peek behind the curtain, Andrew. You did text me that this movie has one joke. I think it has two. There's the one joke I just described. The other joke, which is the one I forgot about, is that Pat is obnoxious and annoying and grating to everyone they know. That's like the other thing about Pat. And this movie explores those two jokes.
Yes, it does.
I will say, just because I don't want to talk around stuff the whole time, like, I was nervous about the premise and everything, and I'll just say that, like, if you are someone that thinks this movie's in bad taste or is offended by it, whatever, totally valid, I get it, but I'll just say that in watching it, my fear was that it would be mean-spirited, or use some very outdated language, which by and large it avoids. I think it is so obvious to me that there's no ill intent or malice in any of the jokes. It is just a simple, goofy joke that's not trying to make any kind of social commentary. And it's so much. It's such fluff that I would have a hard time being offended or disgusted by it. You might not think it's funny, but I think we can talk pretty openly about the jokes made in this movie.
Yeah, I think. I don't. You pretty much summed it up. I think this is
specifically everyone is nice to Pat. Like, the whole joke is that everyone is curious, which is fine, but they don't want to ask the direct question, so they try to use context clues, because everyone's too polite. They don't want to hurt Pat's feelings by admitting they can't tell. And I think that's kind of like the saving grace here.
a little bit. Like, there's no malice, really,
Yeah.
like, in most people. And obviously our pseudo-villain of the story has a little bit more to it. But generally speaking, most people, the issues with Pat have nothing to do with that. They're just mostly annoyed that Pat has no awareness of personal boundaries and is extremely selfish and self-centered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew, before we dive into this movie, the jokes, the gags, the scenes, we're going to talk about the cast of this film. And of course, we're going to start with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the movie, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, who is getting your Mark Strong Award for? It's Pat.
I'm just going to cut straight to the chase. It's Charles Rocket. It's Charles Rocket.
I agree 1,000%.
Kyle Jacobson, Pat's new neighbor, who is the aforementioned neighbor who gets weirdly obsessed with figuring out if Pat is a man or a woman. It's his... I wouldn't even necessarily say it's a slow descent into madness. It's a pretty quick descent into madness. But basically just it becomes his obsession. It breaks up his marriage. It breaks up his life. This becomes the only thing that he really is focused on figuring out. And this is probably part of it that I would say has not aged super well. But the dedication that he gives to this performance it's palpable. It's there.
I think it's absolutely hilarious that this question of curiosity drives him insane, because it's such a stupid thing to wonder about and obsess over, and it is so over the top, and he so goes for it, and falls in love with Pat because of the question. Like it is they go so hard, and he is so willing to go there. I just love, like, you go back to like the earliest scenes of his character Kyle interacting with Pat, and you kind of see them kind of squint their eyes like, huh. And then like one of the earliest gags is Pat crushes their nuts, and he goes, oh, that must hurt. And then you realize Pat's talking about
actual nuts.
Walnuts, factual nuts. And then he's like, huh. And it's just that small curiosity that like becomes an obsession, ends his marriage, drives him insane. It is so over the top and bonkers, but I had such a blast with it, and I loved his performance. I didn't think I knew him from anything. He's a former SNL cast member. A lot of
yes, you absolutely do.
Dumb and Dumber. I totally didn't recognize him, but probably in part because even though they come out the same year, he plays Dumb and Dumber totally straight. Like he's the bad gangster guy. He's like one of the main villains. It's funny that these come out the same year, and I think they're just so different ends of the spectrum. Continued to work throughout his life, plenty of bit parts. Tragically no longer with us, passed away in 2005 by his own hand. Honestly, I was reading his Wikipedia, a pretty gruesome suicide.
Yes.
Very sad to learn that. I didn't know that's where he ended up, but my God, this was one of the easiest Mark Strong awards I've ever picked. I mean, I loved everything he was doing. Genuinely, all the funniest parts of the movie involve his character, as far as I'm concerned.
He's notoriously known for being somebody that got fired from SNL during the kind of infamous 80-81 season, which was basically the first season of SNL that the entire original cast were gone. And so Lorne Michaels also leaves the show that season. And they bring in this whole new cast, and he was kind of promoted as this like Bill Murray, Chevy Chase hybrid type thing. And he ended up hosting Weekend Update, and he was actually featured, I think, in more sketches than anybody else except maybe Joe Piscopo. And he was doing a show in I think it was February of 81, and it's hosted by somebody that was from Dallas. And so they did a whole Who Shot JR joke sketch based off of that whole thing that was happening on Dallas. And he dropped the F-bomb on SNL. I think it was during the closing moments, like at the end of the show when they were just kind of all standing around before they do that. Oddly, it was not a violation of FCC rules because it was uttered past the safe harbor time, but it was a violation of broadcast standards. There was a ton of negative press already with the new cast and the declining ratings and everything. The new producer got booted almost immediately. Rocket ended up getting dismissed, as well as tons of fellow cast members like Gilbert Gottfried and others that were there. And so when the show comes back in that fall, only Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy were still on the cast. But so he's notoriously known in many circles for being the guy who got fired from SNL for saying the F word. So another SNL alum in this movie, believe it or not, just not one that was on the show for very long, and one that mattered or really had any serious legacy. But you look at his filmography, you look at his list of TV shows, you've absolutely seen Charles Rocket in something. He's oddly also in Wagons East. So in 94, he's in It's Pat, Wagons East, and Dumb and Dumber. He's in two of the most notoriously known comedies and one of the best comedies in the same year. Oddly enough, several members of this cast are also in Pulp Fiction, which comes out not long after this, and that made the joke of they were in one of the worst received movies of the year and possibly the best received movie of that year. So, what a weird, odd legacy this film has carved for itself. But he's great. He's fantastic here. He dedicates to this role completely, and he is the villain, so you're not supposed to think at any point that what he's doing is okay. Right. But yeah, the dedication he does to this is intense. And heck, the year before this, he was in Hocus Pocus. This dude was just in everybody's childhood, whether they realized it or not, apparently.
Of course, we got to talk about Julia Sweeney as Pat Riley, the creator of this character, obviously a screenwriter here, the driving force of this movie. And even though we very handily gave Charles Rocket the Mark Strong Award, and I stand by it, Julia Sweeney's working their butt off. And I do think there's a lot of comedy here. Just ultimately where the story goes and everything, gotta go Charles Rocket. But Julia Sweeney talking about the origins of this character. For one, I do appreciate they fully admit, yeah, it's not a character we would do today. It is a product of its time. They don't try to say people are misunderstanding it, whatever. They acknowledge it is what it is. But talking about the origins of this character, they said they were basing it off of a coworker they had that was just extremely obnoxious, didn't understand their boundaries. A lot of the characteristics we see in Pat, in the Groundlings, she developed a character based on this person they knew in real life that was a man, so she was trying to play a man. But she was getting criticism that she doesn't really pull off being a man. So that's where they kind of landed on this in-between space. We're like, well, what if the joke is that you don't even know if it's a man or woman? And then we have the character of Pat. And literally, the Wikipedia was very nice enough to give me a synopsis of every single Pat sketch. But it's always the same thing. Someone is wondering if they're a man or woman. Pat says something that seems to give you the answer. And then it's revealed that what they said can actually be interpreted in multiple ways. And we still don't know if Pat is a man or woman. That is the beginning and end of that joke. A lot of work goes into the look of Pat. Like, you know, they're a little chubby to hide if it's a feminine or masculine figure. She has these fake eyebrows. Even like put something on her lips to tone down the brightness of her lips. I assume gender neutral haircut, the perm. A lot is going into this, and the voice, the lips. I mean, I like what goes into this performance, and I gotta give Julia Sweeney just tons of credit for being able to pull it off. And boy, 85-minute runtime or whatever it is, staying in this character in that costume, lots of power to you. There's something here in sketch form. As we get to scenes, I guess we'll talk more about how it works as a movie, but Julia Sweeney working their butt off.
And you can actually see a lot of these sketch concepts actually work their way into like various versions of the film as well. Like the idea of Pat's significant other, Pat at the drugstore, Pat at the barber, like those are all used here in some varying form or fashion to kind of just, again, add to the confusion of the character. Because that's, like I said, that's one of the main things the character, that's one of the only jokes the character has. But she's dedicated. That is 100% unquestionably true. I can't like you said, I can't imagine having to play this character repeatedly all day for weeks at a time. But she's up for the task, and there, you know, you can say there's issues with the film, but her performance it's Pat. I mean, I don't, no pun intended, I guess, but like that she is playing the character as intended, as written, as it is presented on screen, to great effect.
And then we have Dave Foley as Chris, Pat's love interest in the movie, and another character where we are not supposed to be able to tell if they are supposed to be a man or a woman. Two things here. First off, Dave Foley, hilarious. One of those faces that if you don't recognize the name, you definitely recognize the face or something they've been in. Andrew, I think our generation probably most associates Dave Foley with Kids in the Hall. Watched plenty of that back in the day. There's still sketches that float around and go viral every now and then online. Very funny. Like Dave Foley a lot. Hashtag PP. This character ages much worse than Pat because Pat is such a specific, obviously not real person. It's so over the top. We're all in on the joke. The character of Chris is Dave Foley in a wig. And that's it. And it's like, it's either a woman with a masculine jawline or a man with a long haircut, and that's all you need to suddenly be this big mystery. There's just much less craft put into this character, which I think makes it harder to swallow. I had more trouble with this character, which is just Dave Foley talking in a high-pitched voice and long hair. Didn't quite work for me, and they're not even supposed to. They're the straight character to Pat's wackiness. So they're not even. There's just not as much. Won't have as much fun here.
Well, then the mystery of this character isn't nearly given as much focus either as Pat is. Like, obviously,
Right.
there's supposed to be this kind of like they're both like androgynous, I guess, if we're gonna use the term, and like that's the idea is they don't know, like they get a gift at this will be fun for both of us. Like they add to it a little bit, but like it's not really played up as much as Pat is. Like Pat obviously is the driving force of the plot, but yeah, this really is. It's just Dave Foley in a wig. Now, Pat in one of the sketches had a partner named Chris that was played by Dana Carvey. Apparently, the story is that when they offered the chance to play the character here, he said no. But I mean,
he had already done
both
Wayne's Worlds by then. He had his own show maybe by '94, so I can totally understand.
Or maybe his show had been canceled and they were like, maybe you want something to do. And he was like, nah, I'm good. But anyway, yeah, it's just Dave Foley in a wig. It's a little tough.
Kathy Griffin is in this movie. Apparently, like I think the credits say as herself. They call her Kathy. It's Kathy Griffin. But they host a radio show. They're not an actor. It was a little odd to me that she is somehow playing herself or a fictionalized version of herself. But I like Kathy Griffin a lot. Unfortunately, they're again playing, I don't know, the character Pat is so wacky that like I feel like everyone else is playing the straight man. So Kathy Griffin is just one of Pat's neighbors that Pat calls Kathy their best friend, which she's surprised by because Kathy Griffin really can't stand Pat and they're always hanging around and she's too polite to kick Pat out. But it's early Kathy Griffin. I mean, she's really funny, a little underutilized because I think she's funnier than what they give her here, but Kathy Griffin.
Yeah, Kathy Griffin was born in Oak Park, Illinois, which is where I used to live. But
Fun fact.
Yeah, she's not even really meant to be funny in any of her stuff here. She's just like annoyed by Pat. That's really all she's doing. Like
even like her radio show, she gives like sincere real life advice. Yeah,
and then Pat comes in and gives terrible advice. But it's odd to see Kathy Griffin just kind of in a very much like straightforward role like this, just because you always assume she's going to be doing something comedic related. And I mean, it's a comedy film, but like she specifically is just basically just Pat's neighbor that Pat doesn't have any idea that she's annoying.
It's a pretty deep cast. I mean, a lot of small bit parts. Probably don't need to go through all of them, but I do want to shout out Julie Hayden, who plays Stacy Jacobson. This is neighbor Kyle's wife. At least she's his wife at the beginning of the movie, but as Kyle gets more and more obsessed with Pat, she hits her limit and leaves him, which, again, this is the funniest part of the movie for me. I just love the absurdity of this little curiosity growing to totally wreck this man's life. Julie Hayden, a few credits around this time, shows up in The Cable Guy, also the Robin Williams movie Toys, although tragically does pass away just 3 years after this, 97, I believe, due to breast cancer. So R.A.P. Julie Hayden. But funny part, even though she is, once again, playing a straight man to Charles Rocket's absolutely wacky character, is such an important sort of like baseline to show someone normal in his house as he spirals out of control.
Yeah, and she does a great job at playing against that, and then ultimately, like you said, the scene where she leaves is just kind of the encapsulation of that, and does a great job. But unfortunate that she passes away so soon after this.
And really, I just want to shout out Tim Meadows, who is just a manager at the radio station. Again, doesn't have many comedic parts. This is pretty early. I don't even know if they're on SNL by now. But such a small part. Not even a cameo at this time, because we didn't really know Tim Meadows at this point. Phil Lamar, just playing a stage manager at the Ween concert. Absolute also legend. Phil Lamar, also in Pulp Fiction. This is one of the connections I assume you were talking about.
It's Kathy Griffin, it's Julia Sweeney, it's Phil Lamar, and then actually
Kathy Griffin is in Pulp Fiction?
Briefly. I forget who she plays. Let's find out now while we're standing here talking about this. She plays the hit and run witness. But she's in it. And then Steve Hibbert, the writer on this, plays the Gimp in Pulp Fiction. There's a lot of connections, oddly, between It's Pat and Pulp Fiction. Not limited to the fact that we didn't mention this when talking about the writers for this movie. Quentin Tarantino himself says he did an uncredited rewrite on the It's Pat script.
Wow. I would try to parse and figure out like what possibly came from his brain, but I don't know. That's pretty funny. I mean, that's post Reservoir Dogs that he's doing an uncredited rewrite on his Pat. What a weird thing.
I believe he and Julia Sweeney were friends, and that might be how he ended up here and she ended up over there too. But who knows? But Tarantino, like, to his credit, I think he's said that like in the mid '90s he did a lot of like uncredited drafts of scripts or something like that. I feel like he said something to that effect, but who knows what weird Tarantino lines are buried in these scripts, because it's always weird, because like Kevin Smith talked about how he would do that, like in the mid '90s he got brought in for some script doctor stuff, and like he'd see the final movie and like a line of dialogue he wrote was still there, and that's it. So like it's literally it's a dice roll. Like you can do a rewrite on a script, there's no guarantee that at all what you wrote is going to be used in the final product.
Yeah, Tarantino wrote a scene where we stare at Pat's feet for 2 minutes straight. It was really weird. We cut it out.
It's very strange. It's on the deleted scenes.
Oh boy, Andrew, let's talk about this movie. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about the scenes of this film, and we're going to start right there at the high point, the best scene of the movie, or at least our personal favorite. So Andrew, kick us off here. When is this movie just firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene of It's Pat?
I think I got to go with the scene where Charles Rocket, Kyle, finally breaks into the laptop, and we basically see his descent. His descent to psychosis basically takes final form.
His one clue of the password was that you can find it in the dictionary, so he goes through the
entire dictionary,
and it's literally the last word of the dictionary.
It's the last word of the dictionary.
It's a pretty good joke.
It's a pretty, that definitely got a laugh out of me. But basically, we find out throughout the course of the film that Pat has a laptop that they keep a diary in, keeping all of their like personal secrets. That's how they describe it. And Kyle sees this as like, oh, this is the way I can finally find out, Pat's deal. And so he steals it. Pat's distraught, goes looking for it, can't find it. And that's when he gets like the clue about the password and starts going through it. Finally gets in, and it's the most mundane, dumb stuff. Like, none of it matters. Like, none of it's even remotely close to what he was hoping was there. It's talking about how she's like, it's one entry where it's like, I've never told my friends this, but I don't vacuum under my couch, and I haven't for months. It's like, it's stuff like that. It's just a completely inane, just innocuous stuff. And the best part is that when he starts typing in the final passwords, he has like a Pat doll, and he's using the doll's hands to type in the passwords. And then when he finally gets in, he's like screaming at the doll. He's speaking for the doll. He kisses the doll, then finally throws it aside and gets into the laptop. Like, clearly, again, like dedicated to this bit to an almost unhealthy degree. But finally gets in, and then the realization that the diary doesn't have anything just breaks whatever is left of this man's sanity. And he finally basically breaks and goes on the hunt to find out himself personally. But this sequence, like the scenes of him finally getting in, and then ultimately the kind of breaking as he finally finds out there's nothing in this diary. Charles Rocket's just leaning into it in a big way, and I think it's super funny.
It's great. Yeah, I love everything with Charles Rocket in this movie. That Pat doll is definitely in my notes, because just how absurd. Also, I want to shout out this 1994 laptop, which looks nothing like a modern laptop. It's so thick and bulky, and like 6 lines fit on the screen, which is like green tinted. It's insane, this technology. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I think you covered it in that scene for sure. This man's descent into insanity. What a joy to watch. I'm going to highlight a different scene, spread the love around a little bit. I mean, Charles Rock is my Mark Strong Award winner. I love all their scenes. I am going to highlight a scene that he's not part of. It's very early in the movie. It's basically just an It's Pat skit thrown into this movie. It's when Pat goes to a corner store to pick up a few items, and every time they buy an item, you think they're revealing something about themselves when they actually are not. I mean, it's literally just what they do.
There's literally an SNL skit that's just this exact premise. That's kind of what I mean, that like several of those skits get factored in here.
So
yeah.
Pat wants some, he gets some protection for their underarms. Deodorant is what they need. And then, gotta get the lubricant, which honestly I don't know what sex that's revealing. But they're talking about eye drops. Need some feminine napkins. Literal napkins that look nice because you don't know when the aunt is gonna come visit, and the shopkeeper is just so annoyed by Pat. Like, they clearly recognize him as soon as they walk in, wants to get him out as soon as possible. But all those dumb little jokes where you think it's one thing and then little twist and it's something absurd, totally different. It's like a 2-minute scene. It's a good sketch. It's pretty early on, and Andrew, I'm starting to relax a little bit watching this scene. Because I'm like, okay, there's some jokes here, something funny here. I was maybe too scared. Now, the movie continues for another 80 minutes after that, but we'll get to that. It starts off pretty strong, hitting the highs of what you expect from this character. And yeah, that little shop scene there, I'm picking as my favorite because it kind of reassured me that there's something in this movie we're about to talk about on the podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. That's Kathy Najimy is the shopkeeper here. Also a Hocus Pocus alum, and also the voice of Peggy Hill on King of the Hill. Is she
one of the witches?
Yes.
Okay.
She plays the one on the vacuum cleaner.
Right.
She's the one that's not Bette Midler or Sarah Jessica Parker, Chris.
Okay, yes.
But she's, all she is she's like, I don't know if like repulsed is the right word, but just doesn't want to be around Pat. Just very uncomfortable being around them, and just kind of ushers them out of the shop as quickly as possible. And, this is basically just the SNL sketch. There was one of I think it was Catherine O'Hara played the shopkeeper in that version. And the shopkeeper's played a little bit differently. I think the shopkeeper's more like enamored with Pat in that one, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But it's the same premise of just every time Pat buys something, it gives a line that's like, oh, and then nope, no, not at all. I think in the sketch they buy condoms, but the idea is they're like, this is the responsibility of both parties to make sure they're prepared, and it's like that sort of thing. Like, just when you think it's a clue, nope, not even close. Just another little bit part there, but yeah, it's very funny pull. Like I said, it starts the movie off. You're kind of like, oh, okay, we're just gonna kind of be getting some a sequence of Pat sketches, and that's not quite what ends up happening, but this sequence starts us off pretty strong.
Yeah, it's kind of sticking with the early parts of the movie. I did really enjoy Pat as a mail person delivering the mail, because again, this kind of introduces that not every joke is about Pat's gender. They're passing out the mail that's already opened. They clearly have read everyone's mail, and they tell a woman they give some letters to, oh, that battle axe mother-in-law of yours is coming for a whole month, and you're being audited. Hope you get to keep your home, and just keeps walking, and it's like very clearly crossing boundaries, which is a hallmark of this character. Right. And then one of my favorite lines in the movie is when they're getting reprimanded by their supervisor, who is an actor most people are going to recognize, Larry Hankin, who appeared in Billy Madison, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I maybe most know him from Friends, where he's Mr. Heckles, their weird neighbor. 86 years old, still out there doing his thing. So good for you, Larry, because he has looked like he's on his deathbed since I've seen him in the 90s. But so he's reprimanding him about breaking the news to someone that their son is gay, because that was in the letter that they read. And the supervisor's talking about how wrong that is. And Pat's like, I say that's life. Move on. Accept. And the supervisor goes, "That's a federal offense, Pat." And Pat goes, "Being gay?" But clearly talking about reading the letters.
Yeah.
It's oddly, it's for all my fears of this movie. And look, I am not about to get on a soapbox about how this movie is actually liberated and woke and on the right side of things. Don't get me wrong, but it is so not hateful. I mean, here's a little message here from Pat themselves that accept being gay, and the whole joke of this scene isn't that it's wrong to be gay, like it was something like it's a totally normal thing. And as you go through this movie, even something like Kyle falling in love with Pat and trying to make moves on Pat, and Pat denies Kyle, not because they're straight or gay or wrong or weird, like it's everyone's totally accepting of the possibility that there could be a same-sex couple. Being attracted to Kyle or not has nothing to do with revealing what their gender is. Like it's never.
Kyle's not her type. Yeah, sorry. Kyle's not their type, man.
Yeah, it leaves it at that. And I'll be honest, it's probably because Julia Sweeney is the lead writer here. I just don't think that's a place that women go for comedy nearly as much as men. Gay haha type jokes that we saw in the 90s. So again, not trying to put this movie on a pedestal, but it avoids this pitfall so many times. I was actually a little impressed and relieved rewatching the movie that the places that it does not go with this premise.
Yeah, it could have gone to a lot worse places, and certainly many movies in the 90s did go to those places. The gay panic of the 80s and the 90s was very real. And I do also really like in that mail scene that Pat just took the mail patch for like the letter delivers, just put it on the sleeve of the shirt they already wear.
I
like
did
the US
not
mail
even
patch.
notice that. That's so good.
I do like this scene a lot. I think Larry Hankin is just he's just a character actor that you've seen in a bunch of stuff. Pretty Woman. He's in the first Home Alone. I think he's the cop that Catherine O'Hara calls when they're first trying to say that Kevin's home alone. He's the one that's like eating the donuts, and they keep sending the phone call back and forth between different groups. But he's very, very funny. He's very effective here. It's a one-bit scene, doesn't come back, but it's very, very funny. And yeah, like I said, the movie could have gone to a lot more malicious places, but it does not. And like you said, I can only assume that was a deliberate choice. I do. Sorry, this is really awful. But when the guy fires Pat, like he stands up and puts a bulletproof vest on, and goes, "Are you disgruntled?" Like he puts the vest on first, then asks if they're disgruntled, and Pat's like, "No," and he's like, "Good."
You're fired. Yeah. The old going postal, which is so weird that is such a common joke because it's about something so awful. But
right.
Yeah, great stuff. This movie actually has a lot of fun visual flares. I wish it was a little more consistent, but there's a scene early on when Pat and Chris start dating, and like they go to a movie theater. In the establishing shot of the movie theater, on the marquee, it says "later that afternoon," which is just really clever. There's a very Austin Powers style joke where they're at a sushi restaurant. There's some people speaking in Japanese, asking if Pat is a man or woman, and Pat's coworker gives them the answer, but it's in Japanese, and there's a blender going at the same time, so we can't hear it. And a man in a white shirt stands up and blocks the subtitles on our screen, so we can't read it either. Really fun fourth wall breaking stuff. And then they all kind of come early on, because there's one more. It's where Pat loses their job again. They don't have a career, and they look around, and everyone else seems to have a career. You see these people and these men and women as firefighters all walking by in their firefighter uniform. You see some cops, I think. And then you see a group of astronauts in full astronaut gear walk by on the sidewalk as if astronauts just walk around as astronauts. But it's just really fun, silly, good visual jokes that #IPP, they don't last throughout the entire movie, but the few they pepper in, I think are definitely some of the highlights.
Yes, I agree. No.
One of the more odd cameos, I guess you can say it's a cameo. It's Kyle submits some footage of Pat singing to this like America's Funniest Home Videos style show,
Yes.
hosted by Arlene Sorkin.
Yep.
And they're announced as Arlene
Sorkin.
As if Arlene Sorkin is, I mean, look, Arlene Sorkin's great, but they're just kind of a bit writer and actor. Probably most famous, honestly, as the inspiration or original voice of Harley Quinn. Certainly how I know who Arlene Sorkin is, or was, to pass away very recently, R.I.P., Arlene Sorkin. But, yeah, they announced a host by Arlene Sorkin, like it's a name people know in 1994, and I don't know that it is.
So she was the original female co-host on America's Funniest People, an actual show in like 1990.
Really?
So like I think
that makes so much more sense then. Okay.
She was also on she was on Days of Our Lives for a really long time, and she played a character named, it was a really weird first name, Calliope Jones.
I don't know if that's right or not. That's a good pull, Andrew.
But it's I've obviously looked up Arlene Sorkin before for a variety of reasons. For those of you, did you say she's the voice of Harley Quinn? Did we establish that?
And real life
all right.
inspiration, like friends of Paul Dini, and he based the character in part on Arlene Sorkin.
Other people have voiced Harley Quinn, obviously, but Arlene Sorkin is the original and probably the most beloved. She yeah, it's like a Brit part, but like, don't get me wrong, I was also confused when I first saw it. I was like, oh wow, there's like Arlene Sorkin, like, and I was like, wait, what? And then I looked, I was like, yeah, so she was on a similar show. There was a whole big kind of to do when she left the show. She ended up suing the station and everything over her dismissal. But just having a little fun with that here, they actually bring in like the person she talks to is actually also the actual author of the book they're talking about. Like it's another very strange pull for this movie to have like the book they're talking about exists and like it's the actual writer.
And it's like a legitimate person that studies like gender sciences or something. Like they have like a very real
Camille Paglia, the sexual personae.
Yeah.
It's literally an actual book.
That's pretty good.
So again, just like a weird thing to do in this movie, but you know, I'm glad it does.
Just highlight a few more gags that I like here. There's the part where after Kyle steals their diary, their laptop, they just go around asking people if they have their laptop. It's very much like Pee-wee looking for his bike, just asking people. And just the visual of Pat walking up to these, you know, a clear like street hardened gang on the street, and dorky ass Pat walking up saying, "Hey dudes, did you steal anything recently?"
Jesus.
It's very funny. And then you get a good gag here because, like, you know, again, they look like they're tough, and they're like, "What's your deal?" Like, and they ask this buddy, like, "What's the word I'm looking for?" And his buddy like pulls out a dictionary and flips and says,
"No." His buddy pulls out a copy of the sexual personae. And
is that what it is? I thought it was
literally
the
what it
dictionary.
is.
Okay.
No, it's literally what it is.
Well, that's good. Anyway, they find the word androgynous. And like, yeah, androgynous, which, so goofy.
What I love about that scene too, no, I don't know if love's the right word, but they're the first people in the whole movie that just ask if Pat is a man or a woman. And Pat runs away, like, scared. Like, I don't know if it's the notion that people can't tell or whatever, but
it's like the first time they've been confronted with it, because they have a little crisis where, like, well, I got to change my look. This is where the dictionary comes in. Pat looks up androgyny in the dictionary. It is literally a picture of Pat. You know, that old joke.
Literally,
and then it's, I don't know, they go to get a makeover, and they tell the artist, like, I want to look more like my actual gender. Of course, they don't know what their gender is. They give them a few different options, and then end up with just the exact same
haircut. Yeah.
Pat's like, great, this is it. This is me.
They do like a distinctly like feminine looking haircut. They do a more distinctly like male looking haircut. And Pat's like, nah, this isn't me. And then they finally just give Pat the exact same haircut. And that's when Pat's like, yes, it's perfect. It reminds me of that gag in, what is it, the Brady Bunch movie? Where Mrs. Brady, or maybe it's the second one, she goes to get a makeover because she needs to change her look, and ultimately they give her the exact same haircut, and she's like, it's perfect.
And one day we will talk about those movies on this podcast. Andrew.
One day.
All right, there's last thing I just want to shout out here. There's a scene where Pat's at the dentist. All I want to say is that there's a shot from inside Pat's mouth.
Oh.
I'm always fascinated by these shots because you know it's not actually a camera inside someone's mouth. You know they got to build a giant mouth to put a camera in to get this 3-second shot. But I see it in movies all the time. I mean,
maybe there's just like one. Maybe there's just one inside mouth model that they just keep like preserved, that they just take to different movies. It's like you just call them up. Hey man, we need the inside of the mouth shot.
We need the
Say
mouth.
no more.
Get it from the set of Double Dare.
That's a good cut. That's a good pull.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's all. I just love seeing that, especially in the 90s. Andrew.
Oddly, Coneheads doesn't have an inside the mouth shot, does it? It just has the very creepy
the
giant
prosthetic,
open mouth.
Yeah.
But I don't think they ever do inside the mouth.
They do inside the mouth in
he?
Detroit Rock City. They do inside Gene Simmons' mouth, and you see like his tongue moving.
Do they do the inside the mouth in Coneheads? No, I don't remember. I don't know. I feel like we briefly see John Lovitz from inside the mouth, but I don't remember.
Possibly.
Who knows?
It's probably a Wikipedia page.
It's not like we
inside the
just
mouth
watched.
shots.
It's not like we just watched Coneheads. That's for sure.
Andrew, we watch a lot of movies.
That's true.
I don't know, movie.
Movie.
I don't know, Andrew. This is the movie. One last great gag. I want to highlight all of them.
And I got a couple more things I'll highlight too.
Okay, good. Look at this comedy we got.
Look at us. Who would have thought? Not me.
There's this big dramatic scene where Chris has kind of given Pat an ultimatum. Chris laid it all out. They're like, I love you. I want to give us another chance. Pat's oblivious to what they're doing. But as Chris is about to board a ship to go to another country, Pat realizes they want to be with Chris. And there's the shot of Chris in line to board the ship and Pat like at their apartment. And they take off running. We go back to Chris boarding a ship, and then every time we cut back to Pat, they're running across a different landscape. They're running across a beach, down city streets, down just like, they're implying they're running like across the state. But meanwhile, every time we go back to Chris, they're just a few spots closer to getting on the boat. And then finally, Pat catches up. It's a very like, I don't know if subtle's the right word, but it's just a purely visual gag of Chris running across all these landscapes that I thought was pretty funny. One last little good gag.
The first episode Conan did of the Tonight Show, throwing back things a few years, he did that exact same gag where like he like looked at his list. He was doing a checklist of preparing for the Tonight Show, and the last bit was like move to LA or wherever it's shot. And he looked out the window and he was in New York, and then it just does a montage of him just running across the country to get to the right place. And so I always appreciate that gag. But yeah, that's a really, that ends there on a funny gag. But I also want to shout out the band Ween appears in this movie.
Yes. Pretty
oddly.
Prominently. Like,
yeah, like there
several
are several scenes. Jinx, show me a Coke. But it's I just thought it was so odd that like of all the bands to pull, it's Ween.
Is it just for the joke of Pat saying I played with a Ween, which is still even like a stretch because they got to say a Ween, but like, is that the reason you think they landed on Ween?
I wouldn't be shocked if that was at least part of the reason. I don't know any other bands that you could make that reference with. I don't know. There's probably a Primus joke about something that starts with a P and ends with an S, but I don't know. I'm going to leave it alone. Anyway, also, one of the concert guards is a guy named Mitch Pileggi, who he played Walter Skinner on The X-Files and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he's like just this other big character actor who was in tons of different shows. The X-Files for a long time. He was on Supernatural for a long time as well. But I just thought it was super odd that he's here as like the smallest of bit parts, playing almost nobody, before later appearing in a great many things that I am much more familiar with.
Andrew, I can't say I recommend this movie. Can't say it's a great movie. Hashtag PP, hashtag PP. But I honestly, for what I was prepared for, was pleasantly surprised with how palatable it was, how many gags genuinely work, and hashtag PP, peek behind the curtain. I think what I texted you was like, it's technically among the worst movies we've covered on the show, but it will not be the worst or most difficult to record. There's been bigger challenges, 100%.
Not that you folks need to know what those challenges are, but because we've definitely never talked about them before.
They can tell.
But,
they can tell.
They can tell. The age-old thing my friends always say now is that the longer you spend not talking about the movie, the more I know you didn't really enjoy it. But no, I agree largely. It's Pat. There's enough here. I would, like I said, I can't say I'd recommend it. But it is not the most difficult conversation we've ever had.
Andrew, we are over 50% through SNL month. I don't know how these. I feel like we fly through these. We do. Generally one a week. Each of these categories should last us a month of recording, but I feel like they just fly by. I guess it's just life is flying by. Is that it, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean that's life, man.
That's life.
Time is a flat circle.
We got past the movie I was most fearing. We have 2 movies left. One of which, honestly, I don't think I've seen beginning to end. The other one is among my favorite comedies of all time. So I think we're going to end this pretty strong. But next week, it is A Night at the Roxbury. I'll let you figure out which movie I was talking about when I described, my experience with either one. But that's next week, Andrew. For now, it's time for our question of the week. If you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do exactly that by joining our Discord server. There's a link in your show notes. What are you waiting for? Come and join us. How are you listening to me say that every week and not clicking on that link? What are you waiting for? What are you scared of? Get in there. You can leave us a question like Groffles did. Here's what they say, Andrew. So it's hard to forecast or predict while in the midst of it all, but let's play a game of what if. What if comic book movies, or even TV shows now, saturate the zeitgeist so much they fall out of favor? There have been trends in cinema for a while, from greater cultural influence like the space race. I mean, there were the action hero movies of the 80s, and those are literally going through a midlife crisis with movies like The Expendables. All right, the core of this question, I guess, is what if comic book movies saturate it so much they fall out of favor? What if we move past the comic book boom? Andrew, first and foremost, this question was left in our Discord in November of last year. I think maybe we've started to see this happen since then. Comic book movies maybe waning in popularity for the first time in 20 years. What do you think?
There's a couple of different ways to look at it, but I don't think it's I think it's easy to just say that superhero apathy is part of it, but I think there's a general cinematic apathy, or at least shall I say more so a theatrical apathy. The idea of going to movies in the theaters is something that people just aren't doing anymore. But also we are seeing these movies get generally poorer reviews across the board than has typically been seen in the past. Whereas, it used to be a Marvel movie was almost a guaranteed hit. We've seen several rotten Marvel movies in a row, just using the Rotten Tomatoes score. We've seen the box offices tumble a lot. Now, the box office thing, like I said, I think that's part of a greater discussion. It used to be that, you threw a Marvel movie into theaters, you were getting $1 billion almost guaranteed. These days, that's not the case. Now, part of that, I think, is just the more general theatrical apathy you get. The idea of a movie making $1 billion in this day and age is just not as common as it used to be. Your movies like Spider-Man No Way Home, which, one of the biggest movies of the year when it came out. But you look more recently, stuff like Oppenheimer, Barbie, Inside Out 2 seems to be tearing things up right now. It's Guardians of the Galaxy 3 did pretty well. And so that's kind of my only real caveat to saying the superhero apathy has kicked in, is that generally speaking, the good ones are doing pretty well. Like, when you say good, it's obviously a subjective thing, but like Guardians 3 did pretty well. Spider-Man No Way Home did extremely well. Critically, then it was commercially as well.
I thought the Marvels was pretty good, but
The Marvels
that's
is
an
pretty
example
good,
of one that struggled.
It struggled, but it also had rotten reviews. I don't know if that's impacting word of mouth or whatever, but I will say this. The Marvels is, I think, a wonderful time at the movies. I do not understand, really, why it got quite the reception that it did. But obviously, it feels like right now, though, the entire superhero bubble is banking on Deadpool and Wolverine, though. Like, it feels like the entirety of the genre is like waiting to see how that movie does.
His MCU Jesus line seems pretty apt.
And I'm not going to blame Ryan Reynolds at all for leaning into stuff like that and of being like the do all that. I think another big tell is going to be Superman, the James Gunn Superman. I think that's going to be another big. So those are your only two major releases. I guess Captain America 4 is kind of lying in the wings there too. But Marvel definitely ran into some quality control problems. Bob Iger's kind of admitted as much. There was just too much content coming out. The kind of attention to detail that they'd kind of thrived on in the past definitely gave away for a little bit. Obviously, the issues with Jonathan Majors have not helped anything. So Marvel, we're still kind of not really sure where this is all going. And I think that's kind of the additional piece of at least the Marvel apathy, is people are like, none of this feels like it quote unquote matters, which just means that movies have finally become the comics, where people don't want to read stuff that doesn't quote unquote matter. Like, I remember when The Flash was coming out, of all issues of The Flash aside, I remember seeing lots of people like, well, what's the point of watching The Flash if it's not going to lead to anything? And I was like, to have an enjoyable time at the movies. Like this idea that like Batman 89 is not a bad movie because it doesn't lead to a Batman Superman crossover, like, you know. But we're kind of engaged into this idea now that if you're making a superhero movie, it's got to build to something next. And when it doesn't, the
studios
do that,
trained us to expect that. I think
that's true.
Thing. Like Marvel, obviously, but even DC has just been constantly trying to get on that connected universe train. And so I agree.
There's a bigger conversation there, too, about what the studios have trained the audiences to believe. And I actually think that's also a huge part of why we've seen box office and theater attendance in general fall. Like, sorry, I'm talking a lot. I'll give you a second. I'm really sorry. But like Pixar is a great example. Like Inside Out 2 is kind of the exception, because Pixar, for the longest time during COVID, Disney was just dumping those movies onto Disney Plus, not even asking people to pay extra for them. Stuff like Soul, stuff like Turning Red. And like Turning Red, like, I heard everybody say was wonderful. And Soul, I heard everybody say was wonderful, but they got sent to Disney Plus, and then they put out a Pixar movie in theaters, and people didn't go see it. And everyone was kind of like, well, what's the deal? And it's like, well, Disney spent years telling their fans, oh, Pixar movies go to Disney Plus. So you finally put one in theaters, and and this is just a general impact of the streaming era, is almost nobody wants to go see anything because they're like, it'll be on streaming in a couple of months. People are now going to theaters for what they foresee as event type things, and then leaving everything else to just show up on streaming eventually. Fall Guy. Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt are like really at the forefront of everything. Ryan Gosling after Barbie, Emily Blunt was in Oppenheimer. Kind of action comedy with both of them feels like it should have been a surefire hit, and then it wasn't.
My turn. I think the core question is what comes after superheroes if they fade out.
I don't know.
You mentioned Barbie and Oppenheimer. I think the fact that both of those were huge hits is a good thing because they're original movies, not based on IP, not superheroes. Not that there's anything wrong with franchise of superheroes, but you got to have the best times at the box office when there's a healthy mix of everything. So I'm kind of curious what movies have been performing well. So I was looking up the top box office of 2024. Now, Andrew, I just sent you a link in Discord for Box Office Mojo top grossing movies of 2024. If you could open that link and tell me how much money Despicable Me 4 has made at the box office.
I believe this chart is claiming that it has made $1.6 trillion.
I don't know what's happening with their
I believe there is a missing decimal somewhere on the international side of things. The domestic is at 122. That seems a lot more realistic.
But
my goodness.
Despicable Me aside, whatever's going on there. You have Inside Out 2, over $1 billion, which
That's
whatever.
nuts.
It's a sequel, but it's great to see that. Dune Part 2 doing very well. Godzilla vs. Kong, Kung Fu Panda Kung Fu Panda 4, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Bad Boys, Ride or Die. Now, yeah, those are all franchises, or Garfield movies made some money. What the hell? Those are all franchises, sequels, IP, but none of those are superhero movies. I'm trying to see where superhero movies even enter the... Madam Web is 18th on the year. I mean...
There's not been any superhero movies this year.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that's indicative of this question, though. We used to get 4 to 6 a year. We've got one. Yeah, you said there's a few on the horizon, but like the rate of them coming out has slowed down, interest has slowed down, and that's inevitably going to leave room for other things to break through. And while, again, most of these, if not all of them, are based on existing property, except maybe If, that's an original idea that's hitting number 10 so far in the year. I don't know what trend will be next. But it's still more diverse than it has been the past few years.
What I do want to say, though, is the numbers we're looking at here are much less than they used to be, though. I mean,
yes,
the number 9 Ghostbusters Frozen Empire at number 9 is number 9 on the worldwide release with 201 million worldwide, which a Marvel movie would make in its opening weekend sometimes, depending on things. So we're also looking... So it's not just that we've got a very varied top 10, we're also looking at generally lower numbers than we usually get. Like, only the top 5 breached 500 million worldwide. Everything below that, and admittedly, the year's not over. Admittedly, most of the biggest releases of the year haven't come out yet. There's interesting stuff on this list for sure. If Ghostbusters, Garfield, Bad Boys. I mean, like you said, though, Despicable Me, 4th installment. Inside Out, 2nd installment. Dune is a sequel. Godzilla Kong is a sequel. There is not a single thing on here except If that is not a sequel or an adaptation of a previous property. Which some people may say is even indicative of why these numbers are lower. Because people are not being driven to go see things at the theater like they used to be. Whereas... it's tough to say, honestly. Like, what as far as what's going to replace it, I really don't know. You could say more genre pictures, but we've been seeing that. Like, alongside a lot of these superhero movies have been movies like this. I mean, this Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the 4th of these new Planet of the Apes movies that have been coming out for well over 10 years now. I mean, Godzilla Kong is a sequel to movies that have been coming out since 2014. I mean, most of these things are sequels or further installments of things that have been around for a long time now. And like Garfield is a new version, but Garfield is hardly a new character, in Jim Davis we trust, but it's...
What do you think it means that Barbie was the number 1 release last year? Because it's kind of an original film, kind of not. It's based on a property we're familiar with, but this is certainly... I mean, Barbie has had no life in theaters before that film.
Yeah, I think it says a couple of different things. I think, one, it says that I think Barbie benefited immensely from word of mouth. I mean, you're looking at a $636 million domestic on Barbie. Now, that's a lot higher than domestics tend to be. Like Super Mario Brothers movie is pretty good, but even Oppenheimer has like almost half of Barbie's domestic box office, and Oppenheimer is number 3. Guardians of the Galaxy 3 does have 358 million, but like Barbie, I think, definitely benefited from word of mouth. It benefited from availability. And then it was just good. Like, say what you will about good or bad at the end of the day being subjective, but it was super hyped. Obviously, there was the meme culture surrounding it that people were pretty excited for. The marketing campaign, I think, did an amazing job of getting people invested and interested in it. And then the movie delivered on that. Like, looking at the top 10 last year is interesting because you do have stuff in there. Like, you've got Barbie, and you got Barbie at number 1. You got Super Mario Brothers movie at number 2. You've got Guardians of the Galaxy 3 at number 4. You got Across the Spider-Verse at number 6. You've got Wonka at number 7, a movie that people claimed nobody wanted. But there
I mean,
it is, sitting there
yeah.
sitting at $630 million worldwide.
Did you see Wonka, Andrew?
I did not.
I didn't either.
I heard it was pretty good. I didn't have a huge drive to see it, but like, and then even looking at the top 20, if you expand it to the top 20, you've got Creed 3, Five Nights at Freddy's, Hunger Games, Indiana Jones, Meg 2, Aquaman 2, Transformers 17, John Wick 4, Ant-Man 3. Like, last year, you definitely had, the top 20 was like dominated almost exclusively by sequels and genre pictures, and then this year, it's just the superhero movies are kind of lacking. But I think the makeup generally looks the same as it otherwise might have if you're just missing superhero movies this year, really. And that's partly because everybody's retooling. You want to say that's because of the apathy that's been setting in. You want to say it's because of the declining quality. It's any number of things, but like Disney and DC have both basically like hit the brakes and said, all right, we got to figure it out. So Disney basically put Deadpool Wolverine as their big summer release. I don't know that there's even another Marvel movie coming out this year. I was going to check real quick, but no. There's literally one Marvel movie this calendar year, and it's Deadpool and Wolverine. And then next year, we're going to get Captain America 4 and Thunderbolts. And then those are the only two. Although I think Phase 6 starts late next year, and I think it kicks off with Fantastic Four. So it does. So next year, we'll actually have 3. And then DC basically just cleaned off their whole board, and they're relaunching everything with Superman. So there's no DC stuff coming this year either. Now, there are some Marvel shows that I think are still coming out, but they've backed that theatrical content off pretty heavily. And maybe that'll help with the supposed apathy or the bubble or whatever. I don't know, but we'll see. But trends exist in films forever. It's how it is. I mean, in the 50s, the 40s, 50s Westerns there's hundreds of Westerns that were being made. People were churning them out endlessly. And you think about like all the iconic Westerns that are out there. Like, you think about the Man with No Name trilogy. You think about the John Wayne stuff like The Searchers or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, stuff like that. The John Ford era, whatever. But there were also dozens of other ones that nobody remembers. Like, it's that kind of thing where like, the cream rises to the top and everything else gets forgotten. Like, people talk about how like music of the 70s was so much better than it is now. And it's like, no, it's because you remember the good music of the 70s. You don't remember all the bad music of the 70s. It existed, trust me. But,
right.
So Westerns give way to, the spy genre. The 50s and the 60s kind of gives way to the James Bond stuff. And James Bond inspires tons of related spy movies. Suddenly spy movies were all the rage. That doesn't last nearly as long as the Western bubble does. But there was a guy I saw once that argued Goldfinger was a more influential movie than Star Wars because Goldfinger is where James Bond kind of becomes James Bond. And that's where like all the spy gags that everybody would rip off for years to come kind of originate. But then obviously as you get into the 70s, you get sci-fi, you get Star Wars. And then Star Wars kind of ushered in this attempted kind of sci-fi revolution with increasing technologies. And so it'll all give way to something, but I don't think superhero movies are ever going to go away necessarily just because it's easy to make them and they're still pretty successful, generally speaking, despite what the internet and Reddit would have you believe. Fun fact, folks, Reddit is not the majority of people.
Talk about bubbles. Yeah. Looking at the top 10 at the box office, I think superhero movies have comprised anywhere from 40 to 80% in recent years. It looks like that's maybe dropping to 4 or less, maybe even 2. So I don't think it's ending. I think they'll never truly end, like you're saying, but it might not be the dominant trend moving forward. We'll see. But I don't know what's replacing it because everything else still seems to be franchises. And it seems kind of obvious just to say, well, franchises are the new thing. But Barbie and Oppenheimer could be, we'll see what lessons studios take from that. Maybe it is, hey, give talented filmmakers money to do their passion project and it'll find an audience. I doubt that will be the lesson, but that sure would be nice.
It's similar to what happened in the 70s and led to kind of the filmmaker era of like the Francis Ford Coppolas and the Michael Ciminos and the other guy whose name Scorsese. There it is. The leading out of the 60s into the 70s, theater attendance was down. Studios were far more willing to take risks. Because, see, that's kind of an issue right now that we ran into for a while, at least. The studios didn't want to, especially now, it feels like studios don't want to take a risk on anything. They don't want to make a movie that seems kind of weird. Like
that's why we lost the $30 million picture. It's got to be a huge blockbuster. You pump so much money into it, can't fail.
Right. Like, the movies like Knives Out, the success of something like Knives Out, I think actually does speak a little bit to a potential shift in...
yeah, but then the sequels go to Netflix.
Well, that's a whole different argument to make.
It's very frustrating, which we've talked
about. Extremely frustrating. I was not happy that it did that. But at the same time, if Netflix wants to offer you $300 million for or $400 million, or however much it was, for 2 movies, and your star and your producer all get to take home 60 plus million, I'm not going to say no to that. And that's the role streaming plays in it is a whole different story, because there is this whole big thing of just the idea that, we've talked about it before, but just the idea that a streaming movie used to be kind of this, like, guaranteed it was going to be lower quality. But just to make a quick comparison, Knives Out made $312 million worldwide the year it came out, and it was 29th for the year. At $312 million worldwide, it was 29th, and that was in 2019. You compare that to 2024, that would put it at number 8 for the year so far. So we are looking at a very shifting box office climate where movies are just not making the money they used to. And we'll see what it means. A lot of people are hopeful that kind of the studios, if they're backed against a wall, will start taking some chances again. Because right now, it's obviously the streamers are taking more chances than anyone. The streamers are the ones that will be like, hey, here's $30 million, go make me a movie. Netflix just released Beverly Hills Cop 4 for some reason. Like, it's not a risk, admittedly, but like, it's, no studio is going to release Beverly Hills Cop 4 right now because nobody cares about Beverly Hills Cop 4. But Netflix can be like, hey, it's part of the platform, it's part of the stream platform. Like, the streaming approach of making something is much different than the theatrical approach, because it's just different audiences with different goals.
If you have any bold predictions of what will be the next hot trend in cinemas, we want to hear it. Let us know in that Discord server. Again, the link is right there in the show notes. What are you waiting for? Hop in, join us, join the community, join the conversation, and come back next week.
Personally hoping for the Premium Rush franchise.
Bold
just
prediction.
Bike movies everywhere.
Somehow the movie from 10 years ago is just going to start inspiring sequels. Everyone's going to discover it for some reason. Great movie, though. Greatest actor of all time. Michael Shannon is fantastic in it. But come back next week.
And Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in Beverly Hills Cop 4.
It all comes full circle. And God, we got to get out of here. Maybe not every movie is great, Andrew.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. Follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.